A 21-year-old Samantha Josephson grew up in Robbinsville, New Jersey, as the daughter of Seymour and Marcy Josephson. While majoring in political science at the University of Carolina, Samantha studied abroad in Barcelona and planned on attending the Drexel University School of Law after her 2019 graduation. Samantha was a girl who showed boundless potential, who was potentially looking at a partial scholarship to Rutgers, but all her dreams will be snuffed out after making just one fatal mistake. On the evening of March 28, 2019, Samantha went out drinking with friends at the Bird Dog Bar in downtown Columbia. At around 2 a.m., they decided to call it a night, and like so many of us have done before, Samantha pulled out her phone and ordered an Uber. Just 9 minutes later, surveillance footage from the Bird Dog shows a black Chevrolet Impala pulling up outside. Samantha steps outside and enters the vehicle and greets her driver. The man on the wheel was named Nathaniel Rowland, and although he didn't say anything as Samantha climbed into his car, he hadn't actually been expecting a passenger. You see, the car that Samantha had climbed into wasn't her Uber. It was just a similar-looking vehicle she had drunkenly mistaken for her ride. We'd expect from Roland into ultimately telling her to get out of the car, but he didn't. He simply engaged the locks, trapping Samantha inside, and then drove off. It's not clear whether or not Samantha realized her mistake before Roland stopped the vehicle, but at some point, Roland parked up his Impala, pulled out a knife, and inflicted a sustained and savage attack upon the terrified Samantha. Using a bizarre-looking two-bladed knife, Roland proceeded to stab Samantha 120 times. She attempted to shield herself, but she was trapped and Roland was armed, as there were several horrific defensive wounds. Roland also stabbed Josephson in her head with so much force that the knife went through her skull to her brain. A killer blow seems to have come when he stabbed her in her carotid, one of the two main arteries that carry blood to the brain. Samantha also sustained wounds to her face, neck, shoulder, torso, back, long leg, and feet, bleeding out within just 10 to 15 minutes. Roland then dumped Samantha's body into the New Zeon field, where she was discovered by a handful of local turkey hunters. The following morning, Samantha's roommate became deeply concerned when they found she hadn't returned home. Police rushed into action, easily tracing her last known whereabouts to the Bird Dog Bar and Nathaniel Roll's black Chevy Impala. Officers later happened to cross Roland while he was out driving, and after a traffic stop was attempted, Roland jumped out of the stationary vehicle and began to flee. Inside his car, police officers found a container of liquid bleach germicidal wipes and a bottle of window cleaner. But perhaps the most incriminating piece of evidence was Samantha's phone, which Roland had foolishly chosen to keep. He was arrested, questioned, and tissue samples were taken. Disturbingly, the tissues under the Roland's nail tested positive for Samantha's DNA, meaning whatever he was doing after he had killed her had been so vigorous enough for the particles of her skin to become embedded under his nails. Roland was charged with Samantha's kidnap and murder, and it became apparent that Samantha's wasn't his first kidnapping victim. He apparently carjacked a woman at a spotlight in October of 2019 and was extremely violent in the commission of the crime, beating her and threatening her before they drove to an ATM to almost empty her bank account. In July of 2021, Roland was found guilty of kidnapping and murdering, with a judge sentencing him to life in prison. The same judge, a veteran of the legal circuit, said that the murder was perhaps the most heartless and severe he had ever seen, denying Roland's request for leniency. It is also not easy to see why Roland displayed such horrifying predatory behavior. When a stranger accidentally climbs into their car, most correct thinking, people simply laugh it off, perhaps getting a little prickly if they're in a bad mood. Roland found a stranger climbing into his back seat, and his first thought were nothing short of bloodthirsty. Samantha Josephson made an honest and simple mistake, and Nathaniel Roland made her pay with her life.
In the early hours of Sunday, September 17th of 1995, 25-year-old Timothy Stone was driving his young family back from a cookout in their native city of Los Angeles. Also in the car were his 26-year-old partner, Robin Cohen, her 5-year-old son, Christopher, and her 3-year-old daughter, Stephanie, and their 2-year-old brother, Joseph. Timothy wasn't all that familiar with the Cypress Park neighborhood they were driving through, and given that it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning, he hardly had the best view of his immediate surroundings. And what was worse, many of the streetlights seemed to have been shot out. At a fork in the road, Timothy turned onto the 2000 block of Isabel Street, a dark, narrow, dead-end alley that was covered in gang-related graffiti, including one piece that read, Avenida de los Asesinos, the Street of Killers. Timothy had taken a wrong turn, one that would take him and his young family into one of the most dangerous places in the whole of California, the territory of a street gang known as El Avenidas. Notorious as LA's most violent Latino gangster sets, the Avenues, as they're better known as, have a long history of involvement with the Mexican mafia. Respect, loyalty, and secrecy are the cornerstones of their savage belief system, while any challenge to their authority, both real or perceived, is met with swift and brutal displays of ferocity. So, when up to 20 members of La Aves saw an unknown vehicle headed through the heart of their well-defined territory, they saw it as both a direct threat and a direct challenge to their reign. The Avenue Gang are also infamous for their participation in anti-black hate crimes against innocent African-American inhabitants of their neighborhoods. Their violence grew so prolific and hateful at one point that some called their actions a campaign of ethnic cleansing directed at honest, hard-working members of the black community here in Los Angeles. However, when gang members surrounded the vehicle, it would be abundantly clear that Timothy and his family were no rival gangsters or undercover cops. Not only did they appear to be a straight-laced Caucasian couple, but the inclusion of multiple children in the car precluded the possibility of it being some kind of law enforcement operation. Timothy and Robin must have been absolutely terrified as the first of several trash cans smashed into their vehicle. This seems to have been the gang members' way of telling Timothy to back off, and he swiftly began to make a rather erratic U-turn. Only, rather than simply letting the family leave, others threw large steel trash cans in front of their wheels, slowing them long enough for a group of gangsters to completely surround the terrified family. Both Timothy and Robin begged for the men to let them go, but they refused until they received a satisfactory answer to their questions of why the couple was in their barrio, or neighborhood. Timothy simply apologized over and over again, but it was no good. One of the gang members produced a pistol, aimed it at Timothy's face, and threatened to pull the trigger. In a complete panic, Timothy simply put his foot down, plowing into the human roadblock in the hopes that they could make a sudden escape. More than one of the gang was wielding a firearm by that point, and when the front end of Timothy's car smashed into them, they emptied their weapons into the windshield, sending round after round ripping through both flesh and upholstery alike. One bullet struck 3-year-old Stephanie in the head as she lay in her mother's arms. Her 2-year-old brother Joseph was hit in the left foot, and a bullet grazed the flesh of Timothy's back. The family rushed to the hospital, hoping that the lives of their young children could be saved. Joseph made nothing short of a full recovery, but young Stephanie was unable to be revived, passing away just a few hours later, her broken-hearted parents just a few feet away behind a closed door when her time of death was called. The murder sparked widespread anger and outrage, with former President Clinton summing up the national spirit by saying, "A family took one wrong turn, and because they were in the wrong place, gang members felt that they had the right to shoot at them and take their lives and kill an innocent child." Many wondered how such a horrifically senseless killing could occur in the first place, and as journalists descended on Cypress Park, the public began to learn of the pure horror endured by the neighborhood's residents on a daily basis. Not only were innocent people losing their lives in the crossfire of rampant gang warfare, but the hideous initiation rites of the gang's new members often involved them gunning down civilians in order to prove their loyalty. Cypress Park was a place where a run to the corner store for a carton of milk could mean losing your life, and for no reason other than you were randomly selected for death. Many Americans couldn't believe this was happening in the same country as them, but for others, it was the reality that greeted them every time they walked out into the street. Stephanie Cohen was laid to rest a week later. A dozen Los Angeles police officers served as honor guard, with 4 generations of the Cohen family filling the small stone church of the Recessional in Glendale, where cousin Michael Fanning referred to Stephanie as God's little angel. At the time of the service, the search for her killers was almost drawing to a close. They had profiles on all of the gang members local to that particular area of Cypress Park. All they needed to do was find the triggermen. Not long after, 28-year-old Anthony Gabriel Rodriguez, 22-year-old Manuel Rosales Jr., and 18-year-old Hugo David Gomez were arrested and charged with the attack on a terrified young family that was simply unfortunate enough to have made a wrong turn on a dark night. At the end of their trial on August 1st, 1997, a judge sentenced all 3 to 54 years to life in state prison, to be served in separate penitentiaries on opposite sides of California. The American people breathed a collective sigh of relief as the news that Stephanie's killers had been brought to justice. Yet since then, the nation has struggled with the violent gang activity that plagues most of its major metropolitan areas. With St. Louis and Baltimore boasting a murder rate almost double that of other cities, surely it's only a matter of time before another innocent family, both local and non-local, are unlucky enough to make a wrong turn that ends in their brutal, merciless execution. I feel like I should preface this by making it clear that I'm not one of these paranormal-obsessed, ghost-hunting loons that think there's orbs in all their photos. And when I tell you that one of my favorite TV shows is Penn and Teller's BS, where they debunk all those nonsense conspiracy theories and whatnot, I think you get an idea of what kind of person I am. And for years, I went around thinking that science and logic could account for everything, with the only restrictions being the limits of our own knowledge. That was until something happened to me that I genuinely can't explain, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't come up with any legitimate explanation. The whole thing freaked me out so much that it kicked off a kind of hyperfixation in me that lasted for months on end, to the point that my rational skeptic friends started to think that I was losing my mind. But I haven't lost my mind. It actually happened, and as much as people try to tell me that it was nothing but my mind playing tricks on me, I know what I saw, and it just about put the fear of God into me. We're going back to early spring of 2017 here, the time of the year when it's still getting dark fairly early here in the Northeast. It's around 9 p.m. and I'm driving back to Narragansett from my buddy's place in Newport, when I decide to take a shortcut through Saunderston. It's a drive I'd done like 100 times by that point. I felt like I could do it with my eyes closed at a push. But maybe that's what made me so complacent, a self-assured cockiness that's gotten me into trouble on more than one occasion, because about halfway into the journey, I must have switched off and taken a wrong turn. Next thing I know, I'm having to turn into a residential cul-de-sac to make a complete 180, and I'm so embarrassingly lost that I find myself reaching for my phone to check Google Maps. I check my position, mentally make a note of the turns I have to make to get back onto the highway, then start turning off the street as I put my phone away. When bam, there's a car in front of me. I slam on the brakes, let out a string of curse words, and prepare myself for, at the very best, a few scolding honks of their horn. I then start mouthing apologies at the driver, taking my hands off the wheel and being like, "Dude, I'm so sorry. My fault. My bad." When I noticed something really unusual about the car they're driving. It was a legit classic car. And don't go thinking 70s Camaro or something. This thing was a Buick, like one from the 30s or 40s or something. The kind of car you'd expect to see Al Capone climbing out of in Prohibition-era Chicago. And it was crisp, too. The guy must have sunk some serious cash into that thing because pretty much everything looked brand new. I suddenly realized that while I'm checking this guy's old car out, I'm actually still blocking him in. So I start backing up after giving him a nice car kind of thumbs up after pointing to his hood. The guy doesn't react though, like at all. The whole time he's just smiling at me through his windshield. And as I start backing up to let him pass, I remember how he almost looked like one of those old ventriloquist dummies. Something about his hair or how waxy and pale he seemed to just trigger the association. Then, right as I'm about to give him enough space, my car just shuts off. The engine, the battery, everything. I jiggle the keys around, kind of frantically by that point, because I figured I'm making a total idiot of myself in front of the dude with the cool vintage car, but nothing happens. Lights won't turn on, engine won't fire. My first thought is, God, of all the times for my battery to die, why now? My car was a piece of garbage back then, making it disappointing, but not a total surprise. But I'm still blocking in Buick guy, who's surely getting mightily angry after sitting there for a solid few minutes. So I roll my window down, lean out a little, and start yelling over to the guy's car that he has to go around. But he doesn't respond. And all I can hear is this creepy old music coming from his car. I can't see a thing of him because of high headlights. He's not saying a thing, and the freaking song is making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Now this is the part that really freaks me out to recall. As the situation with the guy is turning into something of a standoff, I'm sitting there in the driver's seat wondering why the guy isn't talking, moving, or doing much of anything for that matter. I don't want to honk at the guy. Everything had basically been amicable so far, so I'm just sort of sitting there, waiting, getting more and more anxious as I do so. That's when the lights on my dash start flickering a little, and I think my battery might be coming back on. I don't know much about cars, but I'll take it. So I get all excited thinking I'm going to be getting away from what had been an incredibly awkward situation. I start jiggling my keys in the ignition again, but again, nothing happens. Right until my car radio bursts into life and starts playing the exact same creepy song as the one playing in the other car. It didn't have any lyrics. It was this creepy tritone loop with something playing over it. But somehow it managed to fill me with this feeling of dread as I realized something seriously weird was going on. The whole time I'm basically being blinded by the Buick's headlights while it just sits there. Then suddenly, the thing's headlights cut out, right at the same time my radio does, and I'm plunged into darkness again with my natural night vision having been totally ruined for a few seconds. While I'm half blinded, I try the ignition once again, and I breathe a huge sigh of relief when my car comes back to life again. But that little moment was severely short-lived because, as my own headlights turn on, the old Buick is nowhere to be seen. It came as such a shock that I actually screamed out loud, spinning around in my seat like I might catch a glimpse of it driving away. But no, there's absolutely no sign of that Buick anywhere. It was like it had just straight up vanished into thin air. You think with a big old engine like that, I'd have heard it driving past me, even if I was distracted by other things. And the time between the headlights cutting out and me getting my car running again couldn't be anything over 30 seconds. It would have had to zoom past me to disappear from my view so quickly. Have you ever felt super stoned, and you don't even smoke? That's what it felt like. I'm putting the entire thing on myself, trying to explain it away as like a mini stroke or something, and it even occurred to me that my buddy back in Newport might have dosed me with something groovy, so to speak. But no, sober as a judge the whole time. And you can bet I didn't drink anything because those Rhode Island state troopers just love hunting DUIs. So like I said, because I couldn't find any way to explain what happened, it kicked off something of a hyperfixation in me. I revisited the cul-de-sac where it happened, looked up potential classic car owners in the Narragansett area, and researched medical papers on blackouts and time loss. The latter had me convinced that I was suffering from syncopal attacks, basically when your heart doesn't pump enough oxygen to the brain, a pretty serious condition, so, as you can imagine, I was only too willing to pony up for a medical checkup. The doctor listens to my heartbeat and checks my blood pressure, then, without any further examination, declares there's nothing wrong with my heart. He did say that the blackouts can be caused by stress, but at the time, I wasn't particularly stressed about anything, so I ruled that out as an explanation. One point, I went far out and ended up researching those UFO encounters where people experience time loss, but I figured I'd gone far too down a weird rabbit hole with that one. But as for the thing that people really pick up on with my story for some reason, is the fact that I did actually have a bit of luck when it came to my classic car search. There was a guy out in Middleton who had been trying to sell a 1937 Buick Special for years. The thing was a wreck, but he figured it might catch the eye of some vintage car enthusiasts who'd find the time to fix the old beauty up. I played it off like I was interested in making a purchase and still feel guilty about how excited he got, and he got his nephew to text me over some pictures of the old thing so I could take a good look at it. I'm not saying it was the same model or shape as the one I saw in that cul-de-sac, but I'm not gonna lie, it looked pretty similar. But it's an absolute impossibility that it's the same car, right? A coincidence, if ever there was one. Yet some of the people I talk to about this will always point out the connection and tell me I should have asked where he'd gotten it, if the old thing had been involved in a murder or hit and run. Truth is, the guy didn't know. He said his dad picked it up at a police auction and died before he could get a chance to fix it up. And obviously, anything he knew about the car was buried with him. I suppose I've rambled on enough about this now, and I've already made my point that I can't explain what happened to me that night without sounding like a complete fruitcake. So, I guess I'll just do what I always do, and leave it up to you guys to decide what it was. But please, don't tell me ghost car or whatever, because I've been hearing that nonsense for like 4 years now and I'm sick to death of hearing it. And besides, hypothetically I did believe in ghosts. I think it would mess me up pretty bad to think that I got so close to one, but still drove away, unscathed. I've lived in Utah for most of my life other than a few years in Wyoming. I'm an Uber Eats driver in Utah and have been for a couple of years now. What I'm about to tell you took place about 5 days ago. I had just gotten finished with a shift of delivering food and was on the phone with my mother when I got the bright idea to go looking for a former apartment that we had lived in when I was younger. Now, normally I carry my new 9mm on me, but that was at home, so I decided that I would go home to pick it up so that I don't have no defense if I get into a bad situation. My mother had done some research on the address of the apartment. The apartment used to be called Midtown Villa and was never full of gang activity when I was younger. So I had typed the address into my Google Maps and drove over there. I pulled in and realized that the apartment is now called the Calaveras, and everything was now looking better than it used to, so I let my guard down, which looking back on now I regret. I started polling through the apartments with my mom on the phone, which we had then agreed that I could put her on video chat so that she could see the new upgrades. I had pulled back through the entrance off the main road and started showing my mother the building that used to be our apartment building, and I was pointing at the building and empty lot next to it. That empty lot used to be a playground when I was a kid. First mistake. I was using a phone to show my mother, which made it look like I was recording. Second mistake. I was pointing. Third mistake. I was in a bad area and let my guard down. Now, why did I tell you those mistakes? Because what I didn't realize is, while I was showing my mother, I was passing a guy and a girl and pointing. Now I know, all that alone doesn't seem bad, but apparently I angered someone who must have thought that I was recording them. Even though I had my 9mm with me and a loaded magazine, I had made some odd choices due to the fact that I'm a very direct person. As I continue forward, I realize that I'm being chased by the guy who is now on foot after me. He's yelling at me, calling me out and asking if I wanted to tussle after a while of running towards me and taking photos of my car. Now before realizing it, I was suddenly moving forward faster in my car, and my mind was made up. I was getting out of there and driving off. Now the events that are about to take place are due to the fact that I have some extensive training outside of others' knowledge, even though I had let most of that slip. My adrenaline was pumping, and instead of harnessing it, I mistakenly let it control my actions. With my mom still on video chat, I suddenly took notice of a car pulling up fast behind me. I took off out of there. The car was then behind me. I turned right, They turned right. Same turn I made again, they followed. So I went up to 9,000 south and took a right after stopping, thinking that I was just being paranoid. Nope. They followed me all the way to 1300 west, and that's where I turned right again. And guess who followed? Now, I'm not going to lie. I was very nervous with multiple scenarios playing in my head because I knew that I was in a bad situation. I knew that if it came down to it, I had my pistol. I know what you're thinking. Dial 911. Well, I'm the type of person who rarely does that, and I wanted to get out of this on my own. While all these scenarios crossed my mind, I suddenly got the bright idea to turn right onto 7800 south, so I did, and then they did. But this time, a semi had gotten between us, right behind me. I was happy until the semi had turned left. Then I knew I had to figure out what to do next. My next decision was to turn left. I approached the next light in the left turn lane to get on the road that leads to 7200 south where the I-15 on-ramp was. What I didn't think about was what would happen if they followed me. What will happen next will make you reconsider not asking for help when you need it if you're like me. I turned left, they followed, and sped up on my right in that lane, so I immediately swerved over after turning my signal on and got in front of them, because let's face it, if they get next to me, it could be game over. So I slowed down a little, then they got in the left lane and sped up next to me. So I sped up, and just as we hit 90 miles per hour as well, I slammed on my brakes and they slammed on theirs and turned right. If I had been there, I could have been hit and rolled my car and even died. At the very least, I would be in hospital. That's when they took off down the road on their right, and I booked it to the interstate, drove to a grocery store near my house, and called the police department near the apartment complex to report it. The dispatcher then informed me that I should have called 911 to make the situation easier, and they would have directed me to the nearest police station with officers outside to deal with anything that followed me to the parking lot. The officer then called me and we talked about it, and he had gone on to tell me that that area was very problematic with gang activity. He believes that my extreme concern and judgment were very accurate, so I had made the report just to make it before anyone else had, so I knew that I wouldn't get a knock on the door at some later point. So I then headed home and didn't let my guard down until I got home and knew that I was safe. I told my fiancée about it the very next day, and she told me never to deliver in that area without some form of protection. So in closing, number 1, don't ever leave yourself without protection. Number 2, always ask for help when you need it because otherwise your life could be at stake. Number 3, don't be naive to your situation. I hope this doesn't happen to anyone else. And also just remember that it's not the people with pistols in their holsters that you have to watch out for. It is people who tuck them into their waistbands without a holster that you have to watch out for. Be safe, and thanks for listening.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.